It was well past midnight when the last of the streetlights faded into the rear view, leaving me submerged in the oppressive, ink-black belly of the rural backcountry. I had just finished a grueling 16-hour shift at the warehouse, the kind of day that drains the very marrow from your bones and leaves your mind in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion. The air was thick and humid, a heavy mist crawling out of the drainage ditches and curling across the asphalt like ghostly fingers reaching for my tires. I decided to take the old county road, a winding, narrow ribbon of cracked pavement that cuts through the dense forest, because the main highway was choked with construction crews and orange cones. It was a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. For miles, it was just me and the rhythmic, hypnotic hum of the engine. The world outside reduced to the small, yellowed arc of my headlights. The silence was absolute, a heavy shroud that seemed to muffle even the sound of my own breathing. I had the windows up, but I could still feel the chill of the woods seeping through the glass, a coldness that felt less like weather and more like a warning. My radio had long since given up, yielding nothing but a low, rhythmic static that sounded like someone whispering in a language I couldn't quite understand. So I clicked it off, letting the void of the night fill the cabin. That was when I saw the first flicker. It was so faint at first that I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. A tiny, pale spark in the mirror, deep in the distance behind me. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, and for a moment, there was nothing but the dark. But then it returned, larger this time. Two distinct pinpricks of light that seemed to be vibrating with an unnatural intensity. They weren't just following me. They were gaining on me with a predatory speed that defied the logic of these sharp, dangerous curves. Within seconds, the pinpricks had grown into twin orbs of cold, blue-white light that loomed in my rearview mirror like the eyes of a deep-sea creature. There was no engine noise from the vehicle behind me, just the sudden, overwhelming presence of it. It surged forward until it was inches from my bumper, so close that the vibrations from its tires seemed to rattle my own chassis. I felt a cold knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I tapped my brakes, a gentle warning to get them to back off. But the car stayed glued to me, a shadow following a shadow. Then, without any provocation, the driver flipped on their high beams. The interior of my car was instantly vaporized in a violent, artificial noon. The glare was so intense it felt like a physical blow to the back of my head, reflecting off every mirror and turning the windshield into a wall of white fog. I jerked the tab on my rearview mirror to the night setting, my heart starting to thud against my ribs with a frantic, uneven rhythm. "What is your problem?" I hissed into the empty car, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel. I waited for them to pass, even drifting slightly toward the shoulder to give them room, but they refused to budge. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the high beams clicked off. I exhaled, feeling a brief, hollow sense of relief. But exactly 5 seconds later, flash! The high beams screamed back to life, searing into my retinas. 5 seconds of blinding light, followed by 5 seconds of total darkness. It became a pattern, a rhythmic mechanical pulse that felt like a countdown. Flash. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Darkness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Flash. It was calculated. It was deliberate. It wasn't just road rage. It was a ritual. I tried to accelerate, pushing the old sedan to 70, 80 miles per hour, the engine screaming in protest as I took the corners on two wheels, but the lights stayed right there, pulsing in perfect synchronization with my own heartbeat. The fog seemed to be thickening in response to the light, churning in the wake of our cars like a living thing. Every time the high beams hit, I could see the silhouette of my own shadow cast onto the dashboard, a dark, trembling shape that looked alien and distorted. I began to hallucinate shapes in the woods, pale figures standing just beyond the tree line, watching us pass, but I couldn't look away from the road. My eyes were burning, raw from the constant transition between the void and the glare. I was trapped in a private hell of light and shadow, 60 miles from the nearest town, with a monster on my tail that wouldn't speak, wouldn't pass, and wouldn't stop. I began to scream, just to hear the sound of a human voice over the roar of the wind, but the lights just kept flashing over and over, illuminating the cabin of my car like a strobe light in a nightmare. I realized then that I wasn't just being followed. I was being signaled, but I had no idea that the message wasn't coming from the car behind me. It was meant for the thing that had already crawled inside. The gas station was a lonely island of fluorescent light in the middle of a black ocean, its neon sign flickering with a dying buzz that felt like a lifeline. As I roared into the lot, tires screaming against the pavement, I didn't even bother parking in the space. I slammed the gear into park right in front of the main entrance, the car rocking on its suspension as I threw myself against the door, fumbling for the handle with hands that felt like lead weights. Behind me, the car that had been haunting me for the last 30 miles skidded to a halt, its tires kicking up a cloud of gravel and dust. My attacker, or so I thought, killed his engine, but he didn't jump out to finish what he started. He stayed behind the wheel, his own high beam still locked onto the back of my car, illuminating my interior so brightly that every stray hair on the headrests and every speck of dust on the dashboard was visible. I was frozen, halfway out of my seat, waiting for a gunshot or the flash of a blade. Instead, the driver's side door of the other car creaked open and a man stumbled out. He wasn't some towering slasher. He was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, and he was shaking so violently he had to lean against his door to stay upright. His face was the color of curdled milk, and his eyes were wide, fixed not on me, but on the rear window of my sedan. "Get out!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a raw, primal terror that chilled me more than the fog ever could. "Get away from the car. Run to the building. Don't look back. Just run." I didn't ask questions. The sheer, unadulterated panic in his tone acted like an electric shock to my system. I bolted, my boots hitting the pavement in a desperate sprint toward the glass doors of the station. I burst through the entrance, the little bell above the door ringing with a cheerful irony, and collapsed against the counter. The teenage clerk behind the register looked up from his phone, his eyes widening as he saw me gasping for air, pointing back toward the lot. The older driver had followed me in, slamming the heavy glass door behind him and locking it with a trembling hand. He slumped against the glass, sliding down to the floor, his chest heaving. For a long minute, the only sound in the station was the hum of the soda coolers and our ragged, synchronized breathing. "I saw him," the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum. Every time the fog thinned out, I saw his head rise up. My stomach dropped through the floor. I looked at him, my voice caught in my throat, managed only a weak, "What?" The man looked at me, tears of pure adrenaline leaking from his eyes. "In your back seat," he choked out. Every time I turned my lights off, I'd see a shadow move in my low beams. Then, when I'd hit the high beams to warn you, to scare him, he'd duck back down behind your seat. He was right behind you the whole time, kid. He had a knife, a long, serrated thing. Every time I flashed those lights, I saw him getting closer to your neck. He was waiting for you to pull over. He was waiting for you to stop in the dark so he could finish it. I felt a wave of nausea, so powerful, I had to grab the counter to keep from fainting. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The road rage I had been cursing was actually the only thing that had kept a blade from my throat. The rhythmic pulsing of the lights wasn't a threat. It was a desperate, silent battle to keep a predator at bay. We called the police from the store's landline, and 3 cruisers arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights dancing off the gas pumps. They approached my car with guns drawn, shouting commands into the empty night. But when they opened the back door, the car was empty. All that remained was a heavy, grease-stained canvas jacket, left on the floorboards, and a rusted hunting knife, tucked into the seat pocket directly behind my head. The rear window of my car had been jimmied open at the previous stop, a tiny, darkened rest area where I had pulled over for 5 minutes to splash water on my face. He must have slipped in then, silent as a ghost, curling into the footwell of the back seat to wait for the right moment. The officers searched the perimeter of the gas station and the surrounding woods with K-9 units, but the trail went cold at the edge of the tree line. He had slipped out the moment I reached the light, vanishing back into the shadows he came from. I never found out who he was or why he chose me. Now, every time I get into a car, even in my own driveway, I check the floorboards, I check the trunk, and whenever I see someone flashing their high beams behind me on a dark road, I don't get angry. I just start praying that they're seeing something I haven't noticed yet. The interstate at 3 in the morning is a different world, a liminal space where the laws of the living seem to thin out and fray at the edges. I was driving a desolate stretch of I-65, heading north through the endless cornfields of the Midwest. The cruise control was set to 75, and the only company I had was the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires hitting the expansion joints in the concrete. My eyes were heavy, that dangerous kind of fatigue where your vision starts to tunnel and the white lines on the road begin to look like slithering snakes. I leaned over to grab my thermos of lukewarm coffee, and as I tilted my head back to take a sip, my headlights caught something standing in the grassy median. It was a person. They were standing perfectly still, facing the traffic, their skin appearing unnaturally pale under the harsh glare of my LEDs. I passed them in a blur, but the image burned into my mind. They were wearing a bright yellow raincoat, completely out of place on a bone-dry, cloudless night. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was a highway marker or a trick of the light. But 5 miles later, my heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the median again, was the figure in the yellow raincoat. It was impossible. Even if they had been in a faster car and passed me, there were no other vehicles on the road. I felt a cold prickle of sweat break out across my forehead. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning a ghostly white. I wasn't tired anymore. The adrenaline was flooding my system like battery acid. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, terrified of what I might see. 5 miles exactly. I checked the odometer, and there it was for the 3rd time. This time the figure wasn't just standing there. As I sped past, I saw their arm raised in a slow, mechanical wave. Their face was a featureless mask of white flesh. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, pale surface reflecting my high beams. I began to panic, my breathing becoming shallow and ragged. I pushed the car to 90, then 100, the engine screaming as I tried to put as much distance as possible between me and that impossible entity. I told myself that if I could just reach the next exit, I'd be safe. I'd find a brightly lit truck stop, surrounded by people and reality. But the highway seemed to be stretching, the exits vanishing from the map. Every 5 miles, like clockwork, that yellow raincoat appeared in the darkness of the median. Each time, it was closer to the edge of the pavement. On the 6th sighting, it was standing right on the white line. On the 7th, it was leaning into my lane. I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't just appearing. It was intercepting me. It was learning my speed, calculating the trajectory, and getting ready to step directly into my path. I was trapped in a loop of asphalt and terror, and the thing in the yellow coat was waiting for me to finally run out of road. I knew I couldn't keep driving. The next time I saw that yellow smear in the darkness, I wouldn't be able to swerve in time. I saw a small, rusted sign for a rest area. Not a full truck stop, just a primitive pull-off with a single vaulted toilet and a few picnic tables tucked into the trees. I veered onto the off-ramp so hard my tires chirped, skidding into the deserted lot. I didn't turn off the engine. I kept the car in gear, my foot hovering over the brake, staring into the wall of trees surrounding the pavement. The silence was deafening. No crickets, no wind, just the ticking of my cooling engine. I reached for my phone to call for help, but the screen showed no service, not even for emergency calls. I felt like I had slipped out of the world entirely. Then a soft, wet thud sounded from the roof of my car. My blood turned to ice. Something had landed on top of the vehicle. I looked up at the headliner, watching in horror as the fabric began to sag under the weight of something heavy and articulated. I heard the sound of long, sharp fingernails scraping against the metal, a slow, rhythmic scratching that sounded like a cat at a door, but much larger. Then, a face drifted down from the roof, hanging upside down over my windshield. It was the figure from the median. Up close, the featureless mask wasn't smooth at all. It was translucent skin, stretched tight over a skull with no jaw. The yellow raincoat was wet, dripping a thick black fluid onto my hood that hissed as it touched the hot metal. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was looking at me, sensing my heat, my fear, my very soul. It tapped a single, elongated finger against the glass of the windshield, right in front of my face. I didn't think. I slammed the car into reverse, flooring the gas. The creature was thrown from the roof, tumbling into the darkness like a broken doll. I swung the car around and raced back toward the interstate, not caring if I was going the wrong way or if I blew the engine. I drove for an hour at 100 miles per hour until I finally saw the glowing lights of a massive pilot travel center. I pulled into the bright, crowded lot, sobbing with relief at the sight of truckers and families. I walked into the station, my legs shaking, and asked the clerk if there had been any reports of accidents or people on the road. He looked at me with a hollow, knowing expression and shook his head. "You're the third one tonight," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Did you see the coat?" I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned over the counter, his eyes darting to the door. Check your back bumper, kid. He doesn't just stand in the road, he hitches a ride on the things he likes. I ran back to my car, and there, smeared across my rear bumper in that same black, hissing fluid, was a perfect 5-fingered handprint. It was well past midnight when the last of the streetlights faded into my rear view, leaving me submerged in the oppressive, ink-black belly of the rural backcountry. I had just finished a grueling 16-hour shift, the kind of day that drains the very marrow from your bones and leaves your mind in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion. The air was thick and humid, a heavy mist crawling out of the drainage ditches and curling across the asphalt like ghostly fingers reaching for my tires. I decided to take the old state route, a winding, narrow ribbon of cracked pavement that cuts through the dense forest, because the main highway was choked with construction. It was a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. For miles, it was just me and the rhythmic, hypnotic hum of the engine. The world outside reduced to the small, yellowed arc of my headlights. The silence was absolute, a heavy shroud that seemed to muffle even the sound of my own breathing. I had the windows up, but I could still feel the chill of the woods seeping through the glass, a coldness that felt less like weather and more like a warning. I was leaning over to grab my thermos of lukewarm coffee, and as I tilted my head back to take a sip, my headlights caught something standing in the grassy median about 50 yards ahead. It was a person. They were standing perfectly still, facing the traffic, their skin appearing unnaturally pale under the harsh glare of my LEDs. I passed them in a blur, but the image burned into my mind. They were wearing a bright, slick yellow raincoat, completely out of place on a bone-dry, cloudless night. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was a highway marker or a trick of the light. But 5 miles later, my heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the median again, was the figure in the yellow raincoat. It was impossible. Even if they had been in a faster car and passed me, there were no other vehicles on the road. I felt a cold prickle of sweat break out across my forehead. I wasn't tired anymore. The adrenaline was flooding my system like battery acid. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, terrified of what I might see next. 5 miles exactly, I checked the odometer, and there it was for the third time. This time, the figure wasn't just standing there. As I sped past, I saw their arm raised in a slow, mechanical wave. Their face was a featureless mask of white flesh. No eyes, no mouth. Just a smooth, pale surface, reflecting my high beams like a polished stone. I began to panic, my breathing becoming shallow and ragged. I pushed the car to 90, then 100, the engine screaming as I tried to put as much distance as possible between me and that impossible entity. I told myself that if I could just reach the next exit, I'd be safe. But the highway seemed to be stretching, the exits vanishing from the map. Every 5 miles, like clockwork, that yellow raincoat appeared in the darkness. Each time, it was closer to the edge of the pavement. On the 6th sighting, it was standing right on the white line. On the 7th, it was leaning into my lane. I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't just appearing. It was intercepting me. It was learning my speed, calculating the trajectory, and getting ready to step directly into my path. I knew I couldn't keep the car on the road much longer. My hands were shaking so violently that the steering wheel felt like it was going to vibrate right out of my grip, and the needle on my temperature gauge was creeping dangerously into the red, from the strain of the high-speed chase. The next time that yellow smear appeared in the darkness, I wouldn't be able to swerve. I saw a small rusted sign for a primitive rest area. Just a gravel pull-off with a single vaulted toilet and a row of rotting picnic tables tucked deep into the tree line. I veered onto the off-ramp so hard my tires chirped, skidding into the deserted, lightless lot. I didn't turn off the engine. I kept the car in gear, my foot hovering over the brake, staring through the windshield into the wall of ancient oaks surrounding the pavement. The silence was deafening, a heavy physical weight that seemed to press in on the car from all sides. No crickets, no wind, just the rhythmic ticking of my cooling engine. I reached for my phone to call for help, but the screen showed no service, not even for emergency calls. I felt like I had slipped out of the world entirely, falling into a pocket of reality where help didn't exist. Then, a soft, wet thud sounded from the roof of my car. My blood turned to ice instantly. Something had landed on top of the vehicle, something heavy, something that moved with a deliberate, sickening grace. I looked up at the headliner, watching in sheer, paralyzed horror as the fabric began to sag under the weight of something articulated and massive. I heard the sound of long, sharp fingernails scraping against the metal, a slow, rhythmic scratching that sounded like a cat at a door, but with the strength of a grown man. Then a face drifted down from the roof, hanging upside down over my windshield. It was the figure from the median. Up close, the featureless mask wasn't smooth at all. It was translucent, sickly skin stretched tight over a skull that had no jaw, just a jagged, weeping seam where a mouth should have been. The yellow raincoat was wet, dripping a thick, black, oily fluid onto my hood that hissed and bubbled as it touched the hot metal. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was looking at me, sensing the heat of my blood and the frantic vibration of my terror. It tapped a single, elongated finger against the glass of the windshield, right in front of my face, leaving a smear of that black bile behind. I didn't think. I reacted on pure lizard brain instinct. I slammed the car into reverse and floored the gas. The creature was thrown from the roof, its body hitting the gravel with a sound like a bag of wet sticks breaking. I swung the car around in a spray of dirt and raced back toward the interstate, not caring if I blew the engine or hit a deer. I drove for an hour at 100 miles per hour, my eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the mirrors until I finally saw the glowing, glorious lights of a massive 24-hour travel center. I pulled into the bright, crowded lot, sobbing with the relief so intense I nearly vomited. I walked into the station, my legs feeling like jelly, and asked the clerk if there had been any reports of accidents or people on the road. He looked at me with a hollow, knowing expression and slowly shook his head. "You're the third one tonight," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Did you see the coat?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. He leaned over the counter, his eyes darting toward the darkness outside. "Check your back bumper, kid. He doesn't just stand in the road to scare you. He hitches a ride on the things he likes." I ran back to my car, and there, smeared across my rear bumper in that same black hissing fluid, was a perfect 5-fingered handprint. And the trunk was popped open just an inch. The floorboards beneath my feet didn't just creak. They groaned, like the house itself was trying to warn me to get out, while I still had the breath to do so. That whistle. It was identical. It had that same flat, off-key sharp on the final note that Silas always hit. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My muscles felt like they'd been turned to cold lead. Every instinct I had was screaming that if I looked at whatever was standing at the top of those cellar stairs, the trap would finally snap shut. I kept my eyes fixed on the thing outside, the thing wearing my brother's face like a discarded mask. Its jaw dropped open, further than a human jaw should ever go, and it started to let out a wet, clicking sound. Clack, 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 like dry bones hitting the porch floor. Behind me, the cellar door, the one I knew I'd bolted after dinner, swung open the rest of the way with the slow, agonizing whine of rusted hinges. The whistling stopped. In its place came a voice. It wasn't Silas's voice. It was mine. It sounded exactly like me. Same gravelly tone, same Appalachian drawl, whispering from the dark of the hallway. It said, "Don't be afraid, Eli. We're just here to bring you back to the scene. The coal needs a witness." I felt a hand, long, spindly, and unnaturally cold, press against the back of my neck. The skin felt like damp earth. I bolted. I didn't think, I just lunged forward, bursting through the screen door and slamming right into the thing on the porch. It didn't feel like hitting a man. It felt like hitting a bundle of dry sticks wrapped in leather. We tumbled off the porch and into the dirt, and for a second, I was face to face with it. Up close, it didn't have features. The face I saw from the window was just a trick of the light and shadow, a suggestion of a person. It was just a blank, pale membrane, with holes where the breath should come out. It didn't smell like death. It smelled like ozone and deep, ancient rain. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the tree line, my boots skidding on the damp grass. I didn't head for the road. The road is where they find you. I headed for the old Whispering Mine entrance, the one that collapsed back in '94. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could lose them in the rocks. But as I reached the mouth of the cave, I stopped dead. The fog wasn't just rolling out of the hollow anymore, it was glowing. A faint, sickly green light was pulsing from deep inside the earth. And the sound, God, the sound was deafening. It was thousands of voices, all of them whistling that same mournful tune, overlapping until it sounded like a choir of the damned. I turned back to look at my house, perched on the hill like a lonely grave. The lights were all on now. I could see two figures standing on the porch, side by side. One looked like Silas. One looked like me. They weren't chasing me anymore. They were just waving. A slow, synchronized goodbye. That's when I realized the ground beneath my feet wasn't solid. The moss I was standing on was moving. It was hair. Coarse, gray hair growing right out of the mountain. The whole ridge breathed in a massive, heaving expansion of the earth, and I felt myself starting to sink. The mountains aren't just rock and timber, Eli. They're hungry, and they've been waiting a long, long time for someone to finally listen. The hair, it was like wire, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down into the soft black loam that smelled of ancient rot and wet copper. I thrashed, clawing at the dirt, but the ridge wasn't dirt anymore, it was skin. The whole mountain was a sleeping thing, and I was nothing more than a parasite. It was finally decided to swallow. I looked back at the house, my house, and the lights were blinding now. The two figures, the thing that looked like Silas and the thing that looked like me, they stepped off the porch in perfect unison. They didn't walk. They glided over the grass, their limbs twitching with that same sickening, disjointed hitch. As I sank deeper, the moss rose up to my chest, pinning my arms to my sides. The green light from the mine's mouth spilled out, thick as syrup, coating the trees until they looked like skeletal fingers reaching for a dying sky. The whistling from the cave intensified. It wasn't just a tune anymore. It was a vibration that rattled my teeth and made my vision blur. I tried to scream, but the air in my lungs felt heavy, like I was inhaling silt. The me creature reached the edge of the sinkhole first. It knelt down, its face still that blank, pale membrane. But then, right before my eyes, the skin began to ripple. Features started to push through from the inside. My nose, the scar on my chin, the exact shape of my weathered lips. It was stealing me. Not just my life, but my very being. It leaned close, and I could feel the cold radiating off its skin. It whispered, but the voice didn't come from its mouth. It echoed inside my own skull. "Don't fight the seam, Eli. Every stone in this ridge was once a man who thought he was free. Now, you're just the next layer of the history." The thing reached out and gently closed my eyes with fingers that felt like damp limestone. I felt the mountain give one final, massive heave, a deep, subterranean sigh, and the ground opened up completely. I fell, not into a cave, but into a sea of cold, crushing dark, where 1,000 voices were still whistling that same sharp note. The last thing I felt was the weight of the Appalachian earth settling over me. Miles and miles of it, pressing me into the coal. Up above on the ridge, the lights in the house flickered once and stayed steady. A man who looked like me walked back inside, sat in my chair, and picked up my coffee. He looked out the window at the silent, foggy woods. And he smiled, because out here in the hills, nothing ever really stays buried. It just waits for its turn to walk. The sound. It wasn't the metallic click of a brass zipper like you'd find on a coat. No, it was wetter. It was the sound of something organic being forced apart, like the sound of a dry husk being peeled off a ripened ear of corn, but layered with the sickening rhythmic tear of muscle fibers. Zip, zip, zip. Each pull seemed to vibrate through the very air, rattling the marrow in my bones. I stood there, knee-deep in the freezing creek water, my flashlight beam shaking so hard it looked like a strobe light against the dark current. The figure in the floral dress didn't move her feet, but her shoulders began to hunch forward, the fabric of the dress straining until the seams at the armpits began to pop with the sound of small caliber gunshots. The woods behind me had gone beyond quiet. They felt dead. It was as if every living thing within 5 miles had pulled its head into its shell and was holding its collective breath, waiting for the mountain to finish what it had started. The smell of those funeral lilies grew so thick I could almost taste it, a cloying, sugary rot that coated the back of my throat. I tried to back away to pull my boots from the sucking mud of the creek bed, but my legs felt like they'd been rooted into the silt. I was part of the landscape now, a witness to something the old-timers only whispered about over dying embers. The zipper sound reached the base of her spine, and that's when the dress started to sag. It didn't fall off. It started to fold inward, as if the person inside was shrinking, or perhaps uncoiling. The head, still tilted at that impossible, neck-breaking angle, began to rotate. Not the way a human neck turns, but a slow, grinding revolution, like a heavy stone being dragged over gravel. I watched, paralyzed, as the back of the mom creature split wide open. A pale, glistening line of something that looked like raw, wet porcelain began to emerge from the rift in the skin. It wasn't a spine. It was a series of long, needle-thin ribs that began to unfurl like the legs of a spider waking up from a long sleep. The floral fabric of the dress didn't tear. It was being absorbed, the colors bleeding into the white mass that was pushing its way out of the mother-shaped shell. Then, the voice came again. But it didn't come from the figure in the water. It came from the trees directly above my head. A dozen different voices all at once. All of them sounding like her. All of them whispering the same 3 words in a perfect, terrifying harmony. Is it me? I looked up, and for a split second, my flashlight caught the glint of 1,000 tiny, unblinking eyes reflected in the branches, just as the thing in the water finally turned completely around to show me what was hiding behind my mother's face. The thing in the water, it didn't have a face. Not really. When it finally turned around, I saw that the skin where my mother's kind, wrinkled features should have been was as smooth as a river stone, except for a single jagged vertical slit that ran from the hairline down to where the throat started. As the light hit it, that slit peeled back like a set of wet, gray eyelids, revealing a row of teeth. Not human teeth, but tiny, needle-sharp shards of flint, all vibrating in a frantic, humming motion. It didn't have eyes, but I could feel it looking at me, studying the shape of my fear like it was a map it was learning to read. Then, those 1,000 voices in the branches above let out a collective, sharp intake of breath. The pale porcelain ribs I'd seen emerging from its back suddenly snapped outward, spanning 10 feet across the creek, and the mom creature didn't walk. It launched. It moved with a speed that the human eye isn't meant to track, a blurring streak of white and floral print that hit me with the force of a fallen landslide. I was slammed backward into the freezing mud, the wind driven from my lungs in a desperate, silent wheeze. The weight of it was immense, cold as a tombstone, and smelling of deep, forgotten caves. I felt those spindly, porcelain limbs pinning my wrists into the silt, and the gray slit in its head opened wider, hovering just inches from my own face. The humming of the flint teeth grew louder, a high-pitched drone that made my nose start to bleed. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. The creature's smooth, featureless head began to melt. The gray skin started to swirl and shift, taking on the color of my own tan, the shape of my own nose, the exact 3-day stubble on my jaw. It wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It was stealing me, atom by atom, right there in the dark of the high lonesome. I tried to fight, to scream, to kick, but my body felt like it was being turned to lead. My memories, Sunday dinners, the smell of Grandpap's pipe tobacco, the way the light looks hitting the ridges in autumn, they were being pulled out of my head like threads from a sweater. I watched through my fading vision as the creature's face became a perfect mirror image of mine. It even blinked the same way I did. It leaned in close, its new lips, my lips, curling into a slow, practiced smile. The voices in the trees went silent. The porcelain ribs folded back into the creature's spine with a series of wet, muffled clicks. It stood up, letting my limp, empty body sink further into the creek's embrace. It reached down, picked up my fallen flashlight, and brushed the mud off the floral Sunday dress, which was now nothing more than a scrap of gray skin it tucked away into its own side. I watched, paralyzed and hollow, as the thing that looked exactly like Caleb turned and started walking back up the switchback trail toward the cabin. It walked with my gait, my posture, even the slight limp in my left knee. As it reached the edge of the porch light, it stopped, looked back toward the dark creek one last time, and let out a long, satisfied sigh in my mother's voice. "Don't you worry now, Caleb," it whispered into the wind. "I'll take real good care of the house." Then it stepped inside, clicked the lock, and turned out the lights, leaving me alone in the water. Just another sound for the next poor soul to hear calling from the deep laurel thickets. There's a place deep in the 13-mile holler where the maps just give up. The locals call it the Salt Eater's Well. It's an old stone structure tucked behind a grove of weeping hemlocks that look like they're trying to hide the damn thing from the sun. My granddaddy, a man who feared nothing but the Lord and a dry harvest, told me never to go near it. He said that back in the Great Depression, the well didn't run out of water. It ran out of mercy. He told me that when the wind blows from the north, if you listen close enough, you can hear a bell ringing from deep inside the earth. Not a church bell, mind you, but a small silver dinner bell. The kind my grandmother used to call us home with. I should have listened. But curiosity in the Appalachians is a dangerous, hungry thing. Last night the moon was just a sliver of bone in the sky, and that bell, it started. Ting, ting, ting. It was rhythmic, insistent, coming from the direction of the hemlocks. I grabbed my granddaddy's old iron fire poker and a heavy-duty lantern, and I started walking. The air got colder with every step, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin and settles in your joints. When I reached the clearing, the hemlocks were dead silent, their branches draped in a thick, unnatural frost. The well sat there, its stones blackened as if by fire, and the wooden crank was turning, all by itself. Creak, creak, creak. The rope was taut, disappearing down into a darkness so absolute it felt like a physical weight. I leaned over the edge, the smell of old copper and wet salt hitting me like a physical blow. I lowered my lantern into the shaft, the light flickering against the slimy, moss-covered walls. About 30 feet down, the light caught on something. Something that wasn't stone. It was a hand. A pale, slender hand, perfectly preserved, reaching out from a crack in the masonry. It was holding a small silver bell, but as I watched, the fingers didn't just ring the bell. They started to grow. The skin bubbled and stretched, the knuckles popping like dry kindling, until the arm was 10 feet long, snaking its way up the side of the well toward me. I tried to pull back, but my feet were frozen to the frost-covered stones. The arm kept coming, moving with a fluid, liquid grace that no human limb should possess. And then, from the depths of that black hole, a face began to rise. It wasn't my grandmother's face, but it was wearing her Sunday hat, the one with the silk roses. As the face broke the line of the lantern light, I saw that it had no eyes, just two perfectly round, polished mirrors where the sockets should be. In the reflection of those mirrors, I didn't see myself standing at the top of the well. I saw myself already at the bottom, looking up. The hand, that long, white, tapering thing, clamped onto the mossy rim of the well with a sound like a wet boot pulling out of the mud. Its fingers were like cold, wet wax, and as they tightened on the stone, I felt a sharp, stinging heat in my own fingertips. I tried to scream, I tried to beg, but my throat was suddenly full of grit. It was salt, coarse, biting salt that sucked every drop of moisture from my tongue until it felt like a piece of dried leather in my mouth. I watched, paralyzed, as the creature hauled its torso out of the dark. It didn't have bones, not like we do. Its body moved like a heavy curtain in a draft, shifting and folding in ways that made my stomach turn. The Sunday hat it wore was pristine, the silk roses looking as fresh as if they'd just been plucked from a garden. But the face beneath it was a void. Those mirror eyes, those terrible polished circles, they were getting closer. I looked into them again, and the me at the bottom of the well was screaming now. I could see the bubbles of my own breath rising in the black water in the reflection. I could feel the cold pressure of the deep stone walls closing in around my ribs. Even though I was still standing on the grass, the creature reached out its other hand, the one not holding the bell, and it touched my cheek. Its skin was crystalline, rough and abrasive, like a block of salt that had been sitting in the rain. "The well is thirsty, Silas," it whispered. The voice didn't come from the creature. It came from the silver bell. The metal itself was vibrating, ringing out the words in a high melodic chime that shattered the silence of the holler. And the mountain always takes its grain. As its fingers brushed my skin, I felt my own weight begin to evaporate. My memories, my granddaddy's face, the smell of the hemlocks, the heat of the wood stove, they weren't mine anymore. They were being pulled through that touch, flowing like a river into the creature's hollow frame. I looked down at my hands and saw them turning pale, turning translucent, turning into salt. The world began to tilt. The trees, the sky, the flickering lantern, they all started to recede, becoming nothing more than a small, circular pinprick of light far, far above. I felt the splash of freezing, briny water against my back. I wasn't on the ridge anymore. I was at the bottom, looking up through 30 feet of suffocating dark. I watched from the depths as the creature, the thing that was now wearing my face, my clothes, and my very soul, leaned over the edge of the well. It looked down at me with my own eyes, adjusted Granddaddy's fire poker in its grip, and let out a long, slow breath of satisfaction. It reached up and took off the Sunday hat, tossing it down into the shaft. The silk roses fluttered through the air like dying birds before hitting the water next to my head. Then, with a strength I never knew I had, it grabbed the heavy stone lid of the well and began to slide it into place. The silver bell gave one final, mocking ting, and then the stone slammed shut. The last thing I heard was the sound of my own boots crunching through the frost, walking away toward the cabin, leaving me to wait in the salt and the dark for the next curious soul to hear the bell. The rain started as a whisper, just a soft hiss against my windshield, like fingertips dragging across glass, until it thickened into a steady, angry rattling that swallowed the sound of my tires. The kind of storm that doesn't feel natural, like it wasn't passing through so much as settling in, choosing a stretch of road and deciding nobody was getting out of it clean. I shouldn't have been driving. That's the part people always say when they're telling a story like this, but I mean it in a more literal way. The weather app had screamed red warnings all afternoon. My mom had texted twice, "Wait until morning." My friend had called and said, "Dude, don't be stupid." And I'd said the dumbest thing in the world. "It's only an hour. I'll be fine." An hour. At the start, it really did feel like just an hour. The town lights shrank behind me and the world turned into headlights and darkness. The road was a two-lane ribbon cutting through trees that leaned in close like they were listening. I turned the radio up and down, trying to find something that didn't sound like static and doom. Every station had the same problem. It didn't want to be heard. There'd be a voice for a second, muffled, drowned, then a wash of static that rose like a wave and crashed over it. I tried Bluetooth. My phone showed bars, then none, then bars again like it couldn't decide if reality applied out here. I told myself the storm was messing with it, and then the road sign appeared. It wasn't reflective like it should have been. It didn't flash back at my headlights. It just absorbed the light like a piece of wet cardboard. Road closed ahead. There was no detour sign, no orange cones, no flashing lights. Just that one message hanging on a crooked metal post. I slowed automatically. My heart did that stupid little jump it does when something feels off and you don't know why yet. I looked for the place the closure started, the barricade, the construction vehicles. Something. There was nothing. The pavement kept going, straight into the rain. I drove on anyway, because I'm an idiot. Because the road wasn't actually closed, right? There's no barricade. The sign could have been left out by mistake. The county forgot it. Some prank. A leftover from weeks ago. Anything normal. A mile passed. Then another. The storm deepened, turning the trees into dark smears. Water ran in silver sheets down the windshield, no matter how fast the wipers moved. The road started to shine black and slick like oil. Then my headlights caught movement ahead. A person, just standing at the edge of the shoulder, half hidden by the curtain of rain. They were holding something, maybe a hood over their head, maybe a sign. I couldn't tell. My first thought was, they need help. My second thought was, nobody stands out here like that unless something's wrong. I eased off the gas. As I got closer, I saw what they were holding. Not a hood, a flashlight. But it wasn't shining forward. It was pointed down at the asphalt, like they were trying to illuminate something at their feet. Their head was bowed. Their posture was wrong. Too still, too stiff. Like a mannequin someone had posed and forgotten. I rolled past slowly, staring. They didn't look up. They didn't react to the car. They didn't even seem to breathe. My skin prickled. I glanced in my side mirror. They were still there, and for 1/6 second I thought their head had turned, following me. But the rain smeared everything into a trembling blur. I pressed the gas, just a little, and then my dashboard lit up. A soft orange warning, low tire pressure. My stomach tightened. Not now. The steering wheel started to vibrate faintly, like the road had turned rough, but I knew the difference. I'd driven long enough to recognize that subtle wobble. I had a flat. I coasted onto the shoulder as far as I could without dropping into the ditch. The rain hammered the roof. The wipers squealed like they were complaining. I put the car in park and just sat there for a second, watching my breath fog the glass. It was too dark outside to see much, but when lightning flashed, it lit the trees up white and skeletal, and for a blink, I saw the figure again. Not beside my car, back where I'd passed them, still standing, still holding the flashlight, still looking down at the ground. That didn't make sense. They were too far back. and the trees between us made it impossible to see them from here. But I had seen them, clear as a photograph, stamped into my eyes by the lightning. I blinked hard. When the darkness returned, so did my rational mind. It was a trick of the storm, reflections, stress. I told myself that as I climbed out of the car, rain soaking my jacket instantly, the wind shoved at me. Cold water slid down the back of my neck like someone had poured it there on purpose. I crouched by the driver's side tire and felt my heart sink. It wasn't just low, it was shredded, not punctured, not slowly leaking, torn open, ragged, as if something sharp had chewed through rubber. My phone flashlight barely cut through the rain, but I aimed it at the ground anyway. I wanted to see what had done that. A nail? A piece of metal? Road debris? The beam bounced over wet gravel and stopped on something pale. A line, thin, chalk white, stretching across the shoulder and into the road. I followed it with the light. The line wasn't a line, it was a crack. A crack in the asphalt, hairline at first, then wider as it crossed the lane, cutting the road like a wound. Water poured into it, disappearing soundlessly. The crack looked wrong. Too straight, too clean, like it had been drawn with a ruler. I stood up, chest tight, and then the flashlight beam caught another sign, further ahead, barely visible through the rain. Not a road sign this time. A handmade one. Cardboard, nailed to a tree, letters scrawled in black paint. Turn around, my breath caught. I stared at it, rain dripping from my lashes. There was no way that had been there before. I would have seen it. I would have. Lightning flashed again. The trees turned white. The road turned white. And the crack in the asphalt, it wasn't a crack. It was an opening. A split that went deeper than pavement. Deeper than dirt. Like the road had been peeled back, revealing a darkness underneath that didn't reflect light at all. It looked like a mouth held open, waiting. When the lightning faded, the opening seemed to shrink. The road looked almost normal again. Almost. I stumbled back to the car, fingers numb as I yanked the door open. I slammed it and locked it without thinking, like a lock could protect me from something that could open the earth. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the phone. No service, not even the emergency call icon. I tried anyway. Nothing. The radio clicked on by itself, static at first. Then, a voice. Not a station voice. Not a warning alert. Not a song. A man's voice, close and quiet, like he was speaking from the passenger seat. Don't get out! My blood went cold. I snapped my head toward the passenger side. Empty. The voice repeated, clearer this time, riding the static like it belonged there. Don't get out. Don't look down. Don't look down. My mouth went dry. Who is this? The radio crackled, then a laugh, wet and thin, wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. The voice returned. You already looked. The lights inside the car dimmed. The dashboard flickered like a candle in a draft. For a heartbeat, the engine sputtered, even though the key was still in the same position. The storm outside seemed to lean closer, and then I saw something in the rear-view mirror. Headlights. A car behind me, coming up slow through the rain, beams wobbling as it approached. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. Somebody. Anybody. A tow truck. A driver. A person with a phone. I threw on my hazards. I flashed my brights. I waved through the glass like they could see me. The car rolled closer. Closer. then stopped behind me maybe 20 yards back. Its headlights stayed on, but the engine didn't sound like it was running. No door opened. Nobody stepped out. I watched, breathing shallow, waiting. A full minute passed, then 2. The radio hissed. My phone screen went black, even though the battery had been at 60%. The car behind me did nothing. Lightning flashed. And in that stark white moment, I saw the truth. It wasn't a car, not really. It had the shape of one, the outline of a sedan. But the surface looked wrong, too smooth, like it had been molded from wet tar. The headlights weren't bulbs, they were holes. Bright holes punched into a dark mass. And there was no driver, no seats, just empty space inside like a hollowed shell. When the darkness returned, my breath came in little panicked bursts. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to think. Get out? No. Stay in? The radio is talking. I turned the key to start the engine. The car clicked once, twice, then died. The dashboard went dark. Total silence except for the rain. I tried again. Nothing. The air in the car felt heavier, like the pressure had changed. My ears popped. My stomach rolled. That's when I noticed the smell. Not rain, not wet fabric, something earthy, like fresh dug soil. I opened my eyes. The crack in the road, the opening, was closer. It wasn't possible. I hadn't moved the car. I hadn't rolled. But the line that had been across the lane was now right beside my front bumper, like the road itself had shifted. A low sound came from outside. Not thunder. Not wind. A slow, wet creak, like something huge, adjusting its weight beneath the asphalt. My gaze drifted without my permission down toward the floorboard, and I saw water pooling there. At first I thought it was rain from my clothes, dripping off me. But the puddle was too steady, too intentional. It spread in a thin sheen over the mat. And inside, it was not my reflection. It was the road, the crack, the darkness under it. Like the puddle wasn't water at all, but a window. Something moved inside the black, a shape that didn't have edges, just the sense of mass, as if darkness was thick enough to push through itself. The radio snapped on with a shriek. Don't look down! I jerked my eyes up, heart trying to tear out of my chest. Outside, through the windshield, the storm parted for a second, and I saw the person again. The one with the flashlight. They weren't behind me anymore. They were standing in the road in front of my car, just beyond the hood. Flashlight pointed straight down at the crack. Their clothes clung to them, soaked through. Their hair hung like seaweed. Their face was turned away, but their head twitched slightly, like they were listening to something beneath their feet. They lifted the flashlight slowly, not to shine it at me, to shine it into the crack. The beam vanished into the darkness like it had been swallowed. Then the person's arm went slack, and the flashlight dropped from their hand. It didn't hit the ground. It fell into nothing. The person took a step forward, and the road opened under their foot like a trapdoor. They dropped, silent, fast, and were gone. The crack snapped shut like it had never been there. The rain seemed to pause. A second of stillness so complete my brain screamed at the wrongness of it. Then the road opened again, right under my car. I felt it, not as a sound, but as movement. The car lurched, the front end dipping, like the ground had been pulled away. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. Something deep below us exhaled, and the windshield fogged from the inside, my breath mixing with a cold that wasn't mine. I screamed. I don't remember deciding to, but my hands slammed the key again and again like sheer panic could spark an engine. Click, click, nothing. The car tilted more. I heard metal groan. The opening under the hood widened, and my headlights illuminated a vertical drop. No dirt walls, no rocks, just a smooth black descent like the inside of a throat. And in that darkness, far below, I saw points of light. Flashlights, dozens of them, drifting like fireflies in a cave. All pointed downward, all getting farther away. My stomach flipped as the car slid another inch toward the edge. Something tapped the passenger window. Softly. Once. I turned my head slowly, dread tightening my neck like a hand. The thing behind me, the fake car, was right beside mine now, impossibly close. Its surface pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. And where a driver's window would be, there was a seam opening, peeling back like wet paper. Inside was not an interior. It was the same darkness as the crack, the same depth, the same hungry absence. A shape pressed against it from within, bulging the darkness outward. And then, as if someone had leaned in close to whisper, the radio voice returned. Not from the speakers, but from everywhere. See, we get home the same way. My vision tunneled. My throat locked. The car tipped forward suddenly, the back wheels lifting just enough that my stomach rose into my chest. And the engine, after all those dead clicks, roared to life. Not smooth, not normal. It started like it had been choking and finally decided to bite back. The dashboard lights flickered on in sickly bursts. The headlights flared bright. I didn't question it. I slammed the gas. The tires spun, throwing water. The car lurched forward, scraping metal as it clawed for traction. For one breathless second, I thought it was too late, that the front end would drop and I'd be pulled down into that impossible dark with all the drifting lights. Then the car surged onto solid pavement. I shot forward into the rain, speeding so fast my headlights couldn't keep up with the road. Behind me, something screamed. Not a human scream, not an animal scream. A sound like twisting metal and wet stone and 1,000 radios tuning at once. I didn't look back. I drove. I don't know how long I drove. 10 minutes, an hour, a lifetime. The storm stayed tight around me, an endless corridor of rain and trees and darkness, until, without warning, it stopped. One moment, the rain was pounding so hard, the windshield looked like a waterfall, and the next it was just gone, like I'd crossed an invisible line. The road was dry, the air was still. My wipers squeaked against clean glass. My hands were locked so tightly on the wheel that when I tried to loosen them, my fingers wouldn't obey. My throat hurt from breathing like I'd been running. Ahead, town lights glowed, normal, warm, distant traffic, a billboard for a chain restaurant, bright and stupid. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and parked under the harsh fluorescent lights like they were holy. For a long time I couldn't move. When I finally did, I stepped out and walked around to the front tire, heart still racing. It was fine, no shred, no tear, fully inflated. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I looked down at the pavement under my car. No crack, no line. Just the normal oil stains and grit of a real gas station lot. A man came out of the store with a coffee and glanced at me like I was weird. "You all right?" he asked. I swallowed hard. My voice came out thin. There was a road closed sign back there, and he frowned. Back where? I pointed vaguely toward the dark road I'd come from. He shook his head. Only road out that way's been closed for months. Storm washed part of it out. They put barriers up. My stomach dropped. But I drove on it, I said. Just now. He snorted like I'd told a dumb joke. No, you didn't. Ain't passable. County put up a detour. Everybody knows. I stood there under the fluorescent buzz, feeling the world tilt in a different way. Because I had seen no detour, no barriers, just that one sign that didn't reflect light. And then, as if my body remembered something my mind was trying to bury, I realized my shoes were wet. Not from rain. The ground was dry here, the air was dry. My clothes were damp, sure, but my shoes were soaked like I'd stepped into a puddle. I looked down. Mud clung to my soles. Dark, thick, clotted mud that smelled like fresh earth, and mixed into it, stuck like gravel, were tiny shards of black asphalt. And one small object that made my blood go cold. A piece of cardboard, no bigger than a few inches, with black paint on it. 2 words, smeared but readable. Turn around. I didn't sleep that night. I don't drive that road anymore. But sometimes, when it rains hard and the night is thick, and I'm stuck at a red light with my window fogging from my breath, I swear I can hear it under the sound of the storm. A low, wet creaking. Like something beneath the road shifting its weight. Waiting for someone to look down.